the Ethical Fashion Guide, has been such an important part of our work as Baptist World Aid, because we see that there are so many workers who operate in those supply chains who are so incredibly vulnerable. So many of them don't have access to anything like a reasonable living wage. They work incredibly long days, but often at the end of the day go home with just a minimum wage that is barely enough to survive. So it means when something like COVID hits, there's no safety net there for the individual worker, for their family, and often the countries that they're living in are countries where the governments themselves have got limited resources to work with.
So ordinarily, as your team engages a company, there's something like 57 questions that these companies are having to respond to over email and conversation. That's not the case this year. How has Baptist World Aid adapted and engaged companies in the pandemic?
Yeah, well, as you say, what we normally do is to try to assess every level of the supply chain. Those who may have planted the seed that became the cotton, think right through every step of the supply chain. Early in the pandemic, countries like Australia, retail was shutting down, we were all going into different forms of lockdown. That has a flow-on effect right back through the supply chain. As we stopped buying as much here, companies started cancelling their orders. Almost overnight, all of the garment orders, or a very significant portion of them, cancelled. So we saw in the month of March, over 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh alone lose their jobs. Those who were able to continue to work found themselves working in factories where they were not experiencing the social distancing that you and I are right now. They were right up against each other, having to use the same machines and being exposed to the risk of the virus. It became really clear that our long-term research in this industry needed to change and pivot to respond to that immediate challenge. We need to look at what companies are doing right now in response to COVID-19 and to both put pressure on them to do everything that's in their power, recognising that they themselves are coming under extreme challenge, and nobody's pretending otherwise. People in countries like Bangladesh or India or Myanmar or China or Ethiopia or many other significant garment producing countries haven't necessarily got access to payments like JobKeeper and JobSeeker. They haven't necessarily got the same kind of support in place for businesses. So whilst it's been a hard year for everybody, it's those workers who face the gravest challenges. There are 6 commitments that we pulled out as this is the essence of what companies need to be addressing. It's making sure that they, wherever possible, maintained their orders with suppliers so that the workers in that supply chain could continue to be paid. Related to that, we were asking companies to take a really careful look. Where is the risk greatest to workers and how can you take special measures to protect them in those places? Related to that is also making sure you can continue to hear from those workers. People who make our clothes are invisible to us. They're so far away. The shirt that I'm wearing today, the estimate is that 100 pairs of hands will have touched this shirt from the planting of the seed through to the person who sold it to me in the store and everyone in between. There's a transmission of value that happens through a supply chain. But often there's not the same transmission of voice. We don't see all those people. Fourth commitment, which is making sure that the conditions that workers are working in at the moment continue to be safe. All the normal measures that would be used to keep people safe, those measures are all stripped away in a pandemic where there's a lockdown, where people can't travel, so that external oversight's not there in the same way. And then finally, the last 2, in order to do that, no company can do it alone. So it's important that they collaborate, and it's important too that they use this moment of disruption to address some of those underlying challenges and to move forward.
So for people who are interested and want to engage and build their own awareness, what is coming out of this research by way of publicising what has been found?
Yeah, so this year we'll be launching a special COVID fashion report and COVID fashion guide. We'll be launching them publicly. We'll be hoping to get a lot of media coverage at that time so we can continue to put pressure on companies to keep acting well where they've been doing that, and to start lifting their game for those that have perhaps been a bit slower or a bit further behind in the actions that they've taken. The report will help to give you a much more in-depth picture of the issues that I've just been speaking about, what companies have done and how the industry in Australia has responded. In the guide, it becomes a whole lot more practical. It becomes something that you and I can pick up and use and think about what we're going to do today and tomorrow. And this is not about trying to shoot for perfection. This is about taking the first step or taking the next step. So there's a set of grades there for over 400 brands, a really simple way that we can pick that up and use that as a guide to our own shopping. We can become part of this bigger movement, talking to your friends and family. It's thinking about whether you reach out to companies yourself and saying to them, you would love to see them step up to that responsibility that they have to care for all the workers in their supply chain.
For you personally, when you walk through any shopping centre, are you hyper aware now of everything, every shop you walk into?
Yeah, I think it's hard to not become more conscious of what's going on as you start to dig more deeply into it. And I think for me, and I'm sure for many of the people watching and listening, it comes right to the centre of our faith as well. For us as Baptist World Aid, we didn't just embark on this journey of researching ethical fashion because it was a good thing to do. I mean, it is, but it also is deeply rooted in our understanding of the fact that God has come to restore his people. I go back to the Old Testament and think of all these different elements of different economic rules that were in place, whether that's ideas of gleaning, harvest, whether that's how we care for the widow, the orphan, the refugee. Throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament is loaded with a whole lot of ideas about how we live together, how we structure our economies. They speak to something of the heart of God. To see those who are otherwise excluded and to say that you too are created in the image of God, that you're valuable, that we have a responsibility in our shared life together to find ways to see you, to make sure we're doing everything that we can to honour the dignity that God's created you to bear. When we think about these supply chains, we're not just thinking about some abstract concept. We're thinking about how do we, as a people of faith, start to see the people who today are invisible. And it's such a privilege for us to be able to spend our time trying to make sense of and understanding how the people who've made our clothes are impacted.